The federal government is shrinking again. Reuters reported in March 2026 that the civilian federal workforce fell by about 12%. Between September 2024 and January 2026, a drop of roughly 386,826 positions as the Trump administration pushed an aggressive downsizing campaign. That sounds current, bureaucratic, a fight over efficiency, accountability, and who gets to control the federal workforce. But America has seen a version of this before. Long before the current battle over the civil service, there was a moment when the federal government made an example of its own workers so publicly and so forcefully that it changed labor politics for decades. In August 1981, after the PATCO strike, President Ronald Reagan gave striking air traffic controllers 48 hours to return to work. When they did not, more than 11,000 were fired. That moment did not only end a strike, it sent a signal. A government could crush its own workforce in public. A president could turn mass firing into a performance of strength, and the lesson would not stay in 1981. The 1981 strike was more than a localized dispute. It was the death knell for the New Deal consensus on labor. For decades, the government and major industries had operated under a shared understanding of collective bargaining. PATCO shattered that. PATCO stood for the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization. These were not symbolic workers. They were the people guiding planes through American airspace under intense pressure, high stakes, and constant fatigue. Their labor was visible the moment it stopped. Planes slowed, schedules broke. The system felt the absence immediately, and that is often when governments become most determined to break labor unrest. Not when workers are weak, when they are necessary. Air traffic control is the kind of job the public rarely thinks about until something goes wrong. That makes it an almost perfect symbol for public labor itself. Highly skilled, high stress. Easy to overlook when functioning, easy to condemn when disruptive. On August 3, 1981, the strike began. Reagan declared it illegal and ordered the controllers back to work within 48 hours. On August 5th, he followed through and fired more than 11,000 of them. That speed mattered. This was not a quiet personnel dispute buried in paperwork. It was national theater. Return now or lose everything. That is what turned the strike into something larger than a labor conflict. It became a televised test of authority. A president drew a line, workers crossed it, and then the punishment came fast enough to feel almost ceremonial. PATCO mattered because it normalized mass firing as a language of government, not a hidden punishment, but a public warning. The administration also moved to keep the fired controllers from returning, classifying them as unsuitable for FAA reemployment. That tells you what kind of lesson the government wanted to teach, not just do not strike, but challenge us the wrong way, and your career can be erased for years. That is not ordinary management. That is exemplary punishment. A purge is never only about the people removed. It is also about those still standing there, watching. The firing of the PATCO workers didn't just end a strike. It sent a frost through the entire American labor movement. Union membership, which had been a pillar of the middle class for decades, began a long, steady decline. Private sector employers saw the action as permission. If the president could fire 10,000 essential workers in a weekend, the calculus for every major employer in the country shifted instantly. The fear of being replaced became a silent participant in every future labor negotiation, a legacy that still shapes the American workplace today. This was the moment the narrative shifted from public service to government inefficiency. It was a masterclass in political framing. Reagan's rhetoric transformed civil servants into bureaucrats and their protections into red tape, presenting the strike as a threat to national order. By defining the workforce as an obstacle to the public good, the administration made the mass firing look like a necessary restoration of authority. The goal wasn't just to replace workers, it was to replace the very idea of what a government employee was supposed to be. This paved the way for the normalization of permanent replacements. Before Reagan, firing strikers was rare. After Reagan, it became a standard management tool, shifting the power dynamic in American workplaces forever. One of the myths of the PATCO story is that the government simply replaced everyone and moved on. The reality was messier. The agency had to improvise after the strike, relying on supervisors, military controllers, and accelerated hiring and training just to keep the system functioning. The FAA's reliance on military controllers wasn't just a stopgap, it was a high-stakes gamble with the safety of the national airspace. Documents from the period reveal a system pushed to its absolute breaking point, held together by sheer exhaustion. The firings solved a political problem faster than they solved an operational one. That matters because workforce purges are often sold as efficiency. But efficiency is not always the goal. Sometimes it is control and obedience. Sometimes the institution is weakened, but power still considers the purge a success because the example was made. The PATCO firings created a scar. That is why the PATCO story feels less like a relic and more like a prototype. The current fight is not identical, but the family resemblance is hard to miss. A workforce framed as an obstacle, protections framed as inefficiency, independent employees framed as resistance, and then the old fantasy returns. What if government worked better once dissent was easier to remove? Expertise mattered less than compliance? Independence looked too much like insubordination? A civil service is supposed to preserve continuity, competence, and memory. The moment those things look like a threat, purge logic gets stronger. The fired controllers weren't just out of a job. They were professionals effectively erased from their field by a lifetime ban. Air traffic control was eventually rebuilt, but the ghost of that weekend remains, a silent reminder of what happens when the state decides workers are obstacles. In the archives, we find the personal letters of families begging for mercy, pleas that went unanswered in the name of administrative strength. These human stories are often excluded from the official ledger, buried under the clean, clinical language of streamlining and reform. One of the most revealing things about workforce purges is how clean the language becomes. Efficiency, reorganization, accountability, streamlining. That is how power prefers to sound when it is doing something harsh, administrative. Because administrative language makes fear look reasonable. And once fear looks reasonable, a purge can be sold as reform. Language like this does not remove the cruelty. It conceals it. It turns public punishment into neutral maintenance and ideology into paperwork. The PATCO firings should be remembered as more than a labor dispute. They should be remembered as a rehearsal. In the archives, we find the letters from controllers' families, pleas for mercy that went unanswered. These artifacts remind us that bureaucratic efficiency always has a human cost, one often excluded from the official ledger. A moment when the federal government discovered how powerful it could look while punishing its own workers in public. That is why this episode is called The Purge Before the Purge. Long before the current war over the civil service, America already staged a clear demonstration of how to break a workforce, call it leadership, and leave the lesson behind. The past does not always return with the same slogans. Sometimes it returns as a habit of discipline and spectacle, a habit of treating public workers as expendable whenever independence becomes inconvenient. Next time on the Footnote Files, American farmers are facing another squeeze. Rising fertilizer and diesel costs are pushing farmers to rethink what they plant, while crop prices and income pressure deepen the strain. That next episode is called Farm Crisis, Then and Now, because long before this latest input cost shock, rural America had already lived through a collapse that shattered families and entire communities. And just like now, the numbers only told part of the story. Behind every acreage report was a family decision, a kitchen table conversation, and a life that had once looked stable,